Hello, welcome to my Marauder guide. I'm going over some basic information that some newer players may not know, and possibly some for experienced players. Firstly, I'll go over utilities. I'll only be listing those I find useful, even if situational. Also utilities for ranked and unranked. Skillful utilities I recommend Inexorable and Brazen. Inexorable I recommend due to there being an excess of CC available to every class, which in return will feed you rage. I choose Brazen so it increases your Berserk uptime, which ties to your Marauder set bonus for damage increase and, depending on your specialization, more buffs. Situational utilities for skillful I recommend Overwhelm and Pathcarver. I only recommend Overwhelm if you struggle to stay on target or want help playing Annihilation to dot spread more reliably. Pathcarver is great utility to take as Carnage, its AoE is heavily underestimated by most newer players. Heroic utilities I recommend Maiming Reach and Unbound. Maiming Reach not only applies a cheaper cost for a healing debuff, it also gives you a ranged root. Unbound for the root cleanse and extra movement speed. It's awkward not taking it. Situational utilities I recommend Undying and Expunging Camouflage. Undying reduces cooldown of Undying Rage and increases duration, which is helpful in ranks. If you're a target, same goes for ranked. Expunging Camouflage is sometimes worth it for the extra cleanse. However, I never use it. It is, however, better than the other options. Masterful utilities I recommend Subjugation and Relentless. Subjugation simply because of that obfuscate cooldown reduction. Relentless because I'm too stingy with my Fury to use it on movement speed. Berserk is almost always used on cooldown. Situational masterful utilities I recommend Phantom and Defensive Roll. Phantom is also one I recommend taking for ranked to allow you to get further during stealth to get out of combat. Defensive Roll simply because of the damage reduction. It's also better than the other options. Legendary utilities I recommend Ruthless Aggressor and Through Victory. Ruthless Aggressor is easily the best utility in the game and it's arguably broken. 75% force and tech resist for 6 seconds, including Vicious Throw proc. Then I recommend Through Victory as a secondary option only for the root break. Situational legendary utilities Interloper and Bloodward. I'd say take Bloodward in ranked. It's really good, being one of our only abilities that heal us and give us CC immunity on demand. However, the cooldown is long, so it's not extremely useful in ranks. Interloper is a very weird utility, and I only bother using it in Fury, as it ends up extending the cooldown if you do not use the second leap. What I personally take, my standard is pretty much always Inexorable, Brazen, Pathcarver, Subjugation, Relentless, Maiming Reach, Unbound, and Ruthless Aggressor. This is mainly for Carnage. I take minor tweaks for both Annihilation and Fury. Being Fury, I swap Maiming Reach for Bloodward. Annihilation, I swap Pathcarver and Maiming for Bloodward and Undying. Now, to the rotation. It's far from difficult and varies depending on what specialization you're playing. Since this guide's for Marauder, I'm going to go over all three. Firstly, I'll cover the opener and burst rotation for Carnage Marauder. Since this is PvP, this rotation can go to priority system at any time due to stuns or target dropping. If everything aligned, you'd want to Frenzy before entering combat, usually 15 seconds on the scoreboard before the start of the match. You'll open with Leap, Berserk, Battering Assault, Ravage. If you don't get the proc for Devastating Blast, Massacre once. Hopefully within that, you'll get a proc. Then you'll either Vicious Throw and activate Ferocity before it lands. If not, just Ferocity into Devastating Blast. Gore and Vicious Throw finisher if it procs. It's also sometimes great to use Choke if you get the proc without needing to Massacre once, to pretty much make sure the burst damage lands. If your rotation falls off or target drops, you'll want to go into the priority system. You should have an extra Ferocity and Devastating Blast before Gore comes back off cooldown. If your main burst is on cooldown, it should be filled with Massacre. If your target is dead or you swap, you want to apply Battering Assault and Healing debuff. to your target unless it's almost dead. In theory, Carnage is very straightforward and easy, however, it's one of the highest action per minute classes in the game, therefore making execution a bit harder, including the very short range of abilities, requiring excellent uptime. Now, for Fury's rotation, you want to do the same thing, activate Frenzy shortly before the game. Your burst rotation would be Leap, Battering, Ravage, Fury Strike, Berserk, Force Scream, Raging Burst, Obliterate, Force Crush, then lastly Smash. Of course, you can fit Vicious Throw anytime that it procs. Fury has a different style of priority system, so you don't use filler as much. You'll first want to know that Berserk grants Destruction. It's also granted by Force Crush. Destruction increases the damage of Raging Burst and Smash by 15%. Then Furious Strike increases critical damage of Smash or Raging Burst by 15%. So while following priority system, you want to keep these in mind for maximum burst window. Furious Strike is off cooldown the most. The rest of the bursts around the same cooldown, giving you time to use Vicious Slash in between downtimes for your main burst cycle. Fury is great for learning and is arguably the easiest. In my opinion, it's just more so nailing the priority system and what procs what. It's also got decent range on most of its abilities, making it easier to stay on target. I always recommend this as the learning go-to spec for Marauder. Lastly, I'm going over Annihilation. You don't have to Frenzy Pre-Fight for this one. It only increases dot bleeds to 100% critical chance and heals the group. So you can save this until you use them. You'd want to open with a Leap, Battering Assault, Deadly Saber, Ravage, Annihilate, Force Rend, Rupture, Smash, and Dual Saber Throw if it procs in any of this, and Vicious Slash filler until you can do it again. However, you do not need the Ravage every time you want to Annihilate, as set bonus crit is only every minute. Annihilation is a lot of filler, and managing your rage is important. Rage builders are Force Rend, Leap, and Battering Assault. Annihilation is the specialization I wouldn't recommend to anyone really. It is, however, still really good and fun to play. It's not quite hard to play either, but does have its own problems. If you're constantly forced to swap targets or just not in combat that much, the specialization will be outperformed by the other two. Next is Cloak of Pain. This is also offensive and defensive ability at the same time. When you're under a bit of focus, it's great to use. It's stronger than PT's Energy Shield of natural damage back to target. If you're constantly being attacked, it's free DPS. It's also obviously a great defensive cooldown for reducing incoming damage. Now, to overview abilities, if you're experienced with the class, you'll probably know all of these. Currently, Obfuscate is one of the best abilities in the game due to the utility Ruthless Aggressor. This is an offensive and defensive move at the same time. You can use this to resist stuns, resist damage, or prevent a target from doing almost any damage for 6 seconds. This is a lifesaver to yourself or even someone else. It's great in arenas for relieving pressure or ensuring CC immunity and resisting damage. In regs, it's a great tool for playing for yourself or your healers, or even someone else you may need to keep alive. Do not use this on a healer if you can help it. The base ability for Obfuscate is negative 90% accuracy, basically making DPS worthless for 6 seconds. Abuse this, simply put. The accuracy debuff is irrelevant for healers. Next ability, Intimidating Roar. This is one of the 2 baseline instant messes. People always overlook this ability and don't think twice about it. It's extremely good in arenas and a great tool for ensuring target swaps. I highly recommend getting used to using it, but not without reason, as people randomly mezzing will fill white bars faster than ever. One of the more well-known abilities is Predation. It's a 10% defense chance for everyone affected by it, including 50% movement speed, with Unbound, allowing your team to kite or secure objectives faster. Another ability is Force Camouflage. This move is great for dropping target, escaping combat, or even time for healing. I recommend saving this one as one of your last cards. Never just use it just cause. Lastly, Mad Dash. This is great to avoid a lot of damage, or even things like Electronet. It's great, but the ability does require decent timing. Get used to using it while you're under fire. It'll definitely save you from taking a lot of damage. It's definitely not just a movement ability. Now to gearing. Probably a good part of you are only curious for this, or maybe not. Either way, I've done extensive testing and have setups to easily change for the stats I find practical. Stats have tended to have tiny difference between each other as long as you still have something ideal. From what I've gathered in my testing, I found 3 different critical pools that work well. The first being 1369 to 1440. This is around 40% critical, no higher or lower. Second being 1658 to 1750. This being around 42% critical, again, no higher or lower. Then lastly, 2020 to 2100. This is 44% critical and again, no higher or lower. Keep in mind that this is with 248 gear, and mastery also ties in with critical. As for mastery and power testing, I've pretty much concluded you hit little to no different being either full mastery or power, or having none at all, including half and half with all stat pools, minus accuracy and defensive stats, leaving your auging best spent in alacrity or accuracy after critical is met. I run an extreme amount of alacrity, as someone would say, but I feel like it can't really be used well in any other stat. It's also noticeable to have more alacrity for Marauder. I recommend anywhere from 8 to 12% to even 17% in Carnage, as it'll go up to 20% due to Atari form. Alacrity isn't only useful for global cooldown reduction, it's also great for trimming cooldowns to even lower. Lastly, I recommend 5% accuracy at the least. Since Marauder is mostly white damage, it's very important to land it. It's also noticeable in key abilities that you will miss. Furious Strike for Fury, Gore for Carnage, Annihilate for Annihilation. If you're skeptical, just try it out for a match and decide for yourself. To reach 5%, you need an enhancement and an augment. I also run up to 10%, sometimes as heavy tank spam is pretty normal for my server. Also, please keep in mind that all of this is my personal opinion. You can go with whatever you want, but this is what I've concluded for myself. Things do vary, as critical is very RNG. Lastly, I'll give you some tips on what targets you should pick as a Marauder, specifically in regs, as in solo ranked and team ranked. Team cooperation will always surpass solo hero strats. Firstly, I'll give you the best bit of advice I can give, and it'll be in general. If someone hits you, target them down first. In regs, especially, your survivability is still pretty good, but it doesn't mean that you have healing capabilities. If you pressure who hits you, they can't do as much damage as if they were free casting on you, making a great way to offensively reduce incoming damage. If you're struggling, ask someone to help. Now, if you're not really being focused down, you'll want to go for Sorks or Mix. They're some of the easiest targets to pressure to lower their overall damage. Also, you'll do a lot more damage to them, as their DCDs don't give crazy damage reduction like warriors, agents, or assassins. If you want to try hard in regs, find someone in your warzone that you know is good. Focus target them and take their targets. 2 good DPS on the same target is usually enough to take them down. If not, in regs, overkill. However, in ranked, this is standard and you should have a team plan and a kill order. Now for more specific class tips and how to deal with them. I'm only giving tips for ideal targets, the ones that aren't ideal, however, you'll be left to figure out for yourself. If you really do wish to know specific class advice, feel free to comment and ask. Of course, that goes for anything too. If you're up against a mercenary or they're a kill target, interrupting their tracer, missile, or raising bolt is amazing for preventing them from doing much damage to you or whoever they're hitting. There is more than one way to interrupt them also, just depending on how good they are. You should judge how much you want to dedicate to them. Obviously, you can start with a basic interrupt, then mad dash the next cast and wait for another cast, and leap to cancel that one. You can CC to stop another cast, and interrupt will be back up again. However, this only works if they're hitting you. You can also cloak if you feel you must, just to cancel a cast. If it's a controlled fight, save Intimidating Roar for a good defensive cooldown like Koto or Energy Shield. However, DPS through Reflect with AoE, as it'll still hurt them. If it's not a controlled fight, buy time with Camouflage or Undying to trade off for one of their defensive cooldowns. Of course, this is depending on how much of a challenge they give you. If you're to CC break versus them, only do it to pop something like Obfuscate, Save Reward, or Undying Rage, or to even break a net. Now, if you're going for a sorcerer, there are two important things to interrupt. They are Thundering Blast for lightning, Force Leech for madness, or Force Lightning. Secondly, you'll want to apply a healing debuff as soon as possible to prevent passive healing from Resurgence or Bubble, and future heals they may have while fighting you, which will happen every time they force speed, reapply healing debuff for the slow, obfuscate if they use polarity shift, making them immune to interrupts. Other than that, have Cloak of Pain going, as dots will take Cloak of Pain. Killing sorcerers are easy unless they have amazing kiting or a good phase walk placement. If they phase walk too far away, just ignore it. It'll be a while before they pop up again. However, don't ignore it in arenas. Against a DPS Juggernaut, Marauder has a lot of options to chunk them, along with reducing their healing from their healing defensive cooldowns. The Reflect does not stop white damage also, so in Carnage you can really lay into them unless they pop Saber Ward. If you have a controlled fight, you can use the same as Strat for defensive cooldown trade-off being Saber Ward and Enraged Defense. Lastly, a DPS power tech. Doesn't have much to defend itself outside great movement speed. Its defensive cooldowns is weaker than Cloak of Pain and has to be spec'd into for damage to return in minor amounts like Cloak of Pain. It's also twice the cooldown. Culto Overload is trash for them, so applying trauma on them will make it even worse for them to try to survive. There is really nothing you have to look out for, so you can lay into them the whole time. Try the Safe Choke for overrides to not be kited so hard. They also do a lot of damage, so obfuscating a Thermal Det or Mad Dashing one is highly recommended. Even Camo is viable to use until it explodes. I hope that I covered everything useful. I will have a text guide for everything I said in this video, and another guide I made. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in comments, and as always, thanks for watching.